Hello and welcome back. This is Professor Paul Gruhn from Manchester Community College and the CSC230 Database for Web Applications course. So far, as you know, we've been going through this book right here, Murach MySQL. We're not halfway there yet. We've been pounding off. We're in week 3. As a matter of fact, this chapter will get finished week 3 out of 8 weeks, and we got to get to chapter 9, and we'll be halfway there in a 500-page book. So we've been pounding it. We've been learning a lot, but we still have a long ways to go. So I hope everybody in the class has kept up with the homework assignments. If you are falling behind by now, guaranteed you're in trouble. The end of week 3, if you're not caught up, you need to do whatever it takes to get caught up, because there is no coming back. Oh, excuse me also with my sniffles. I'm definitely fighting something today. It's been a couple of days since the last video that I made, even though you may be watching these back to back. It's actually Friday the 16th, and I took today off so I could crank out some videos and just enjoy a long weekend. Next Monday we have Martin Luther King Day off, so just kind of get caught up on stuff. So that said, let's dig into it. I'd like you to write down a word: CRUD. C-R-U-D. CRUD. When we talk about database operations, what will happen a lot of times in the industry, you will hear the word CRUD operations. We need some programming, or we're going to perform standard CRUD on the database. And it's already what we've been learning with the existing database has been reading the data. We haven't really manipulated any of the data. We've just looked at data that's been already existed and already put in the database. And so that's the R for CRUD, is read. And we get that from our select statements and all of our joins and all of the things we've done so far, is where we get to read data that already exists. But what you'll also need to do is create the data. The data needs to be put into the one. You have to create the table, a place to put the data, and then you actually have to create the data itself, put data into the table, and that's done with an insert statement. And so that's the C for CRUD. So create. So once you create the data, then you can read the data. So but what happens if the data changes? Somebody's mailing address changes, email changes, phone number changes. Then that's called an update. So that's when you have pre-existing data in your data table, and then you update it. And then the last thing is delete. There are sometimes I no longer need this record, and I can delete this data. Now, interesting on the delete side of it, a lot of times companies will not actually delete data, but they don't need the data anymore. So what they will do, because they want to keep a historic copy of the record, they will have another column to say delete true or false, or delete it, or a status column. And maybe that customer record or that employee record is no longer employed. So you don't want to delete the employee record, because you need the historic information to run your reports, but their status may be unemployed. So you have to really be careful and think about how important your data is before you start deleting it. Figures. Okay, so how many of us are tired of automatic computer-generated phone calling? So, me too. So, you need to be sensitive to when we actually delete data. In this book right now, we're starting off and we're just going to learn how to delete the record. But realize there may be a situation in which you actually don't want to delete the record, but you might flag it, that in your select statement you might say, you know, deleted not true, or something like that, if the data still exists. But more important, we've been talking about selecting and reading data. We're now entering in Chapter 7 on creating, updating, and deleting data. These are CRUD operations, and it's really create, insert, and delete is the actual commands we'll use in MySQL. Okay, here we go. This chapter is actually pretty short. It's about 12 pages, and I only have 7 figures of SQL statements to run. And let's get started. One of the things also we're not doing at this point is we are not designing data tables from scratch. Again, I find this book really, really interesting because they're doing things really reverse from a lot of other SQL and database books that I've used in the past, where basically you design your entity diagram and you figure out all the pieces of data and everything, and then you create a table and you list all the fields and the types and all. We're not even there yet. And it's been kind of, it's actually been okay for me, and I hope okay for you, in that what we're doing is we're touching and feeling and experiencing data that already exists. Now here what's going to happen is, instead of creating the data tables from scratch, we're going to take existing tables and make copies of them that we can then manipulate them and do things with. So we still have a long ways to go, even after this chapter, about learning how to create and design data tables. Okay, in SQL, MySQL Workbench, let's get into our instance. And get rid of that, and then let's use AP, execute that, and then let's take a look at the invoices table, and I'm on pages 198 and 199, and if we go select star from invoices, we're getting all the data from the invoices table. Now this is everything that's in it. If I do describe invoices, excuse me again, I am getting the structure and what the invoice table looks like. And this is the part I just said a minute ago that we haven't gotten here yet, to know about invoice ID, integer type, vendor ID, integer, invoice number, varchar, invoice date, invoice total, decimal, two decimal places, terms, invoice date. We haven't talked a lot about that, the null field, the key field, and default data, and this auto increment. We haven't gone into details of designing all of this. But even just by reading, excuse me, by reading this, we get a sense of what types of things we're going to be doing as we design and create our own data tables. So the first thing the book teaches us is, what if we want to create a test table? What if we want to take some existing data and we want to manipulate? We might want to delete records out of it, as an example, but we don't want to do that to the main data, because once we've done that, we're in trouble and we can't do anything with it. So what the book says, it gives us a create table command. I'll just get rid of that stuff. And we're going to create a table, has invoices copied, has select star from invoices. So what do you think this should do? Basically, is invoice copy should end up looking just like invoices. So let's execute this, and we can see down at the bottom line that it was copied, and notice 114 records were returned. So let's take a look and compare what we've created. If we describe invoices, and then if we describe invoices underbar copy, we see they look identical. If we go, and I can just grab that, look at that. If we go select star from invoices, and if we go select star from invoices, copy, I'm getting the same results. Notice down here at the bottom, from invoices, 114 rows, from invoices copy, 114 rows. Let's go to the object browser and click on the AP database, look at tables, and take a look at what's happened here. We have an invoices table, and now we have an invoices copy table. So this is a great way of, before you're manipulating something, giving yourself a backup copy. And this little statement right here, you want to remember this one. Say, before I start doing some major work, how am I going to protect myself from the data, especially if I'm going to be doing updates and deletes. If I'm going to update data, maybe what I want to do, let's say, let's take this create statement in invoices, and I'm going to say December 31, 2014. So now I want to create this table, and then I'm going to select invoices underbar December 31, 2014. I'm going to select this data. Oh, it doesn't exist. Probably doesn't like my naming convention, I wonder. Let's. Oh, do you know what I did? I went the wrong way. Stupid me. Okay. Invoices I wanted to create up here. Let's go 2014 12 2014 December 31. Wonder, that's weird that that's yellow. I wonder why. It doesn't like that statement for some reason. I wonder if I put it in quotes. Nope. So it's not like, I probably have too many characters on the table. So let's go 2014 December. Now run it. And it actually created it. So now I can select from 2014 December, and I get all the data. So a good reason that you might want to, a good business reason that you might want to copy, use this create table from a given select statement is to have, this is how the data looked at a given point in time. So as you go into now the year 2015, you've got your data from here. Another thing you might actually want to do is a complete backup of your entire database, and we'll be learning about that as we talk about get into administrative functions. If you go into MySQL Administrator, one of the other options on the main menu, when you log in, you'll see a lot of, it's pretty easy and straightforward to go through and just figure out how to back up your database. So I was wondering if Dunkin' Donuts would start giving me royalties for product placement. I doubt it. I don't think the market share on these videos on YouTube is going to be that high. Here's another select statement where the data is basically, we're going to create a table called old invoices, has of the select statement, but here, remember the select statement where we took the invoice total, payment total, and the credit total equal to 0. Remember, we have 114 records in our invoices table. And if I execute this create statement, the create statement existed, and we see that 103 rows have been affected. And if we go select star from old invoices, and hit it, we still get the same data, but we're not going to get the same amount of records. Notice here we're getting 103. Remember also, we can do the count. We learned the count function, and that we execute that. We have 103. And if we come back, compare it to our original table of invoices, we have 114. So this select statement, and a lot of the work we've done, especially in the last couple of chapters, we've gotten into more complex select statements. And here, notice here, this is doing a more compound select statement where we're getting the vendor ID, summing the invoice total, and has some of we're selecting this from the invoices with this math, and we're grouping it by vendor ID. And we're creating a table called vendor balance. And here what's interesting is we're only going to get this table that we're creating is only going to have the vendor ID and the invoice total, and we're going to be calling it sum of invoices. So I'm going to run that, and we see down here that 7 rows have been affected. And now what I want to do is I now have this table called vendor balances that we just created. Excuse me, this is going to be tough. Select SEO vendor balances, oops, select star from vendor balances. And if I execute that, now we can see our vendor ID. And now if we wanted to, we could do a join with our vendors table to actually see what our vendors' name is and stuff. We can do a describe vendor balances to learn about this new table that we just created. And we see we have a vendor ID and we have a field called sum of invoices. So what you've seen on pages 198 and 199 are whole table operations where we've created data from existing data, and we can now use that and manipulate that. So for instance, some of the reports and the select statements we've run so far have been temporary, and we've kind of lost that data. When we just do a select statement, it's just there, and we can export it, and we'll learn about that. So now if you take a look over here, we have invoices, December, we have copy, we have balances, we have old invoices. So we can actually get rid of data, and instead of delete, which might be an obvious word you'd use, the command is drop the table called invoices. And so what we've done is, and then when hit the refresh, old invoices is now gone. Let's also get rid of my invoices 2014 December table. Kind of created that ad hoc, and I think that'll be good. I think we need invoices copy for other work because they probably would have had us delete that now if we needed it. My guess is we're going to be doing some work on the invoices copy table, and so if we select star from invoices copy, we see that we have the 114 records from that, and that data is available to us. And we have the original one, and if we take a look at select star from old invoices, it's saying, hey, AP old invoices doesn't exist. Okay, so now, as we said already on the CRUD operations, we have used the R for reading, and we just did part of a C with a create, where we've created data from created a new table based upon information from reading and pulling from an old table. The insert statement in MySQL, also in PL SQL and in every other version of SQL, is this statement here. And if you read this, and I'm going to going to do a describe invoices. So do this, put the statement up here and then describe the invoices. So this is right below us. Insert into the invoices table these values. Insert in a 115 to the first column, a 97 to the next column, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to the next column, this date to the next column, this dollar amount, this decimal value, this value to the next column, this value to the next column, this value to the next, the date here, and then payment date. Obviously this invoice hasn't been paid yet. So here's the business case. The business case is we're online, we're creating a new invoice, and we need to put this invoice into the record, and we need to get this information, all of this data, into the invoices table that we can report on it. And let's remind ourselves how many records are in the invoice table. How do we do that? Select count from all the fields from invoices. We have 114 invoices. I'm highlighting this statement. This is the first major statement on page 201, and I'm going to execute it. And we see down here that it's been affected and it's worked okay. And then we're going to highlight the select statement and get our count again. Now we're up to 115. So we have just added a record. Now the danger or the frustrating part of this is this values statement. This implies something. This implies that you know exactly where each piece of information goes. It is going to be in the right order, the first column, the second column, the third column. It's just going to take it right across the board. What is a better way of doing this is this way, where what we have is a relationship now between insert into invoices, these field names, and these values. The order of the field names is in the same order as the values. Vendor ID is equal to this. Invoice number is equal to this. Invoice total is equal to this. Now, if you remember, here we have the vendor here and the vendor here. This first one was actually the invoice ID. We're missing invoice ID. And we're also missing the field, this last field, for the payment date. Now, why is that? So let's go back to our describe. And notice that invoice ID is set to auto increment. That if you don't put in a value, it will automatically increment to the next one. And down here, payment date, it's going to default to null. And since we're just creating the invoice in the first place and not making payment, why bother doing that work at that point? So now, let's go ahead and run this field, run this one. And what I really like is here, where what you can now do visually is tie these together. Vendor ID is vendor ID. Invoice number, yep. Invoice total, terms ID, invoice date, invoice due date. So now we see the relationship one-to-one. And by the way, the order can be different here because of that relationship between the fields listed here and the values listed here. If you wanted to put invoice vendor ID at the end, you could. Just make sure you put the value at the end. Obviously, it makes common sense to try to keep the field names and the values in the same order that you would get from your describe statement. So now let's go ahead and execute this insert. We just added another record. We see down at the bottom one row is affected. Now let's take a look at our count for invoices. We're now up to 116, and let's do a select star from invoices and execute that. And down at the very, very bottom, you'll see that that automatically was incremented to 116 because we had fed in 115 on this statement. We did not have an invoice ID on the statement we just executed, and we did not have a null, and the payment date is still null, so that's fine. So what if we have more than one record to insert? What we can do is this, where we can say insert into invoices values, and notice that this is separated with a comma, and a semicolon, and we can insert multiple rows of new information. So I'm going to run this, and we are not using auto incrementer, and look at this, we get an error because of the primary key being 116. So my guess is if I do a run on this, we still have 116 records, that this failed. So again, this really actually goes back to the whole what we really should be doing is listing out our fields. So I'm going to grab from the statement we just ran the field values. We're going to eliminate the invoice ID, and let's eliminate this null at the end, because the null, we don't have a payment date field listed. So if you do this, now this is off topic from the book, but this is actually practical reality. And so now if we run this statement where we're using the fields, this way we're taking advantage of the auto increment feature of the invoice ID, because here we're trying to slam in an ID into the 116 and it already had been created. Now if I run this, column count doesn't match. What did I type wrong? Let me take a look. Vendor ID, invoice number, invoice. Okay, so we've got some date and order stuff messed up. So hang on a second, let me fix this. Okay, so what I had done was, by cutting and pasting can be your friend and your enemy, I had taken the last multiple insert rows statement and combined it with the previous insert single rows, and I didn't have the right data sets. So pause it for a second and make sure your data looks just like this, where you have vendor ID to a vendor ID, invoice number to an invoice number, invoice total to the total, terms ID to the terms, invoice date, and invoice due date. Now if I execute, and also make sure you have comma, semicolon like that. So stop, take a look at it, and then go ahead and execute this statement. Now we got the insert right. Now let's count. We just added 3 more records. We're now up to 119. So this goes back to my earlier statement. The best thing to do is to not have the field names blank and put them in order for all of the values. You're so much better when you're doing an insert statement, especially when you're coding and you're writing code where people are going to need to look at this again. You're going to need to look at this again 5 years from now and say, what the heck was I doing? And you see the relationship here. Okay, we're going to switch databases now, and we're on pages 202 and 203. Please read page 202. We're going to use the EX database, so we're using it, and we're going to focus on a table called color sample. Let's take a look at what that looks like. The color sample has 3 fields in it: color ID, color number, and color name. The ID is an integer, the color number is an integer, and the color name is a varchar, it's a string of 50. The color ID has to be, it cannot be null. The color number cannot be null. The color ID also is a primary key, and so that means it's going to be unique. There's no default, and it's going to auto increment when we create a record. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The color number, an integer, it cannot be null. There's got to be a color number in it. And by default, if you don't know the color number at this point, we're just going to put 0. And the color name, varchar, yes, so that we're allowed nulls for the name. So I'm going to actually do the very last statement on page 203, where we're inserting the values default, default, and null. And so if first of all, let's select. I want to look at the data. Notice that we have 5 records in here. Now, if I do this insert and I say default, default, null, I run it, and now I select it. Now I've got 6 records. Now, what if I want to modify this, and I'm going to actually use the first one. And what if I know the color number, and the color number is here, it's 606 is already in there. Let's go color number 777, and then run that. That's been inserted, and now let's select and take a look at our data, and we see 777 is there, and it was auto incremented to 7. Now what we can also do is insert into the color sample table the color orange. We already have orange, so let's give them a different color. Let's go green and run that. It was inserted, and let's select and take a look at that. I'm now up to 8, but I don't, and we're going to remember, my guess is as we get into the update statement, we're going to be playing with this. And we can then do one more where let's take a look, and let's say let's call it let's yellow, green, how about black, and let's actually give this a color number, and let's block me 999, and then we run that, and then let's select, and we see that we've been able to update. That's auto incremented. We've updated that. It didn't default to 0, and we fed that in. So we saw that by doing the insert several different ways and understanding from our describe statement how the data columns and the data fields work, we can get data into a column many different ways. And to answer the question, what if I wanted to change this color number or add a color value here? Well, one thing that you could do, by the way, is you could actually just type it in here and save it. But we're going to learn those statements shortly. Okay, so I totally don't get what the author was thinking, that we flipped over from the AP database over to EX to do this stuff on the color sample. And then we're going to flip back now to the AP database on page 204 and 205, and we're going back to basically more complex complex things that we're actually doing in the couple of pages before, more complex select statements. So if we use AP, so we're now in the AP database, and if we grab the first create statement, or actually, oh, we're doing an invoice. which actually brings up the point interesting here. Let's go back. Tables here. Bad us. This won't work. Okay, so hang on a second. What we need to do is go back to our create, because it needs invoice archive to do this, and we deleted invoice archive. So if we go back and do this statement, go back to the very first set of statements, and it's really jumping around. I don't like how it's doing this. Insert into. So I think what we want to do is create invoice ACH archive. Hang on one second. Okay, so on page 205, the assumption is that we actually have an invoice archive table. So on the top of page 205, we have this statement: insert into invoice archive, selecting all the records from the invoice tables where invoice total, payment total, and credit total is equal to 0. But if we look over here on our object browser and it doesn't exist, now here it does exist. Okay? What I want us to do, let's pretend it doesn't exist, because we can't, some of us, the first time I went around, I didn't have invoice archive. So if I issue this command right here, drop invoice archives, invoices archive table. If I issue this one command, refresh my object browser, oh, you know what helps? Spell invoices correctly. Invoice archive, I had an S on there. Now invoice archive is gone. So again, issue this command, make sure you have no and then hit the refresh. You have no invoice archive table. Now let's create this table, because if right here the book wants us to insert into the invoice archive table, and I actually have a couple of S's here I need to get rid of. A little typo. So now remember, if I go select star, so let's count from the invoice archive. That table doesn't exist. If I try to select it, that table still doesn't exist. So if I do an insert statement, insert into the invoice archive, records where this is true, it's going to say table doesn't exist. So let's create the table. Now remember, the drop table command basically eliminates the table totally from the database. So what we want to do is the drop table eliminates the table. So we have done that. And here it even says I can't do it because it doesn't exist. Now I'm going to create a table. So I've created the table that I can now count the invoice archive table. I created invoices. I got to get rid of that S as well. Not your friend. Put the S back on. Execute that. Yes, this is real live programming. This is where you screw up real time. Now let's create it. So we've created our table. We can count it. We see we have 119 records. We can select it. But the truth of the matter is, in the invoice archive table, I already have these records that I want to insert. So I want to get rid of all of the data in the table, but we want to keep the table there. So the drop table command gets rid of the table completely. The truncate table will eliminate the data. So I'm going to issue truncate table. And now if I select star, there's no records. If I do a count, there's no records. Now we have a table that exists. What I can do is I can invoice into the archive table all of the records from the invoices table where this statement is true. 103 records have been created. I can do a count on the invoice archive. See, I have 103, and I can select the invoice archive. Then the book on the next page, on the lower part of page 205, does the exact same thing on the invoice insert. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this in, and it's doing the exact same logic. And we would get an error if we did this again, if we ran this again. But what I want to do is let's truncate the table. Let's get rid of the data, count the data, and now let's do this insert. And notice what's happening here is the insert this time has the field names. And we execute this. We select with the count. We get a count from the data, and we can see the data. So just like on the create table, we had created with the field names and we created without the field names, the same thing is true with the insert. The key with the insert statement, which is different than the create, is that it assumes that the table exists. And when you're inserting, the other thing you have to be considerate of is making sure that you don't get duplicate primary keys or invalid dates and things like that. So when you're inserting records, that's probably one of the most common places where errors can happen, especially for primary keys. If a primary key, if invoice ID 100 exists and you're trying to insert in another 100, it's going to blow. Okay, so now as we move on, we've done C for CRUD, create, R for CRUD, read, we've been doing that for a long time, and now U. And we actually even had a little taste of delete with the truncate and the drop, but it wasn't really a true delete statement. Now we're doing U for update. And update assumes there is a record already there, and we want to change some data in the field. So on page 207, they give us an update invoices statement, and you can see that this statement is right here. But before I actually update it, let's take a look at this record. I'm going to select all the fields from the invoices where the invoice number is this. And matter of fact, whoops, if I did this as well, this will actually be a little clearer. Select invoice number, payment date, payment total. So if I select, I want to select this record, see that I have the record. Notice invoice ID is 78, vendor, and if I select it this way, notice that here's my invoice number. My payment date is 11/7/30, and my payment total is $1,762 right now. But I want to change, I want to set, I want to update the invoices table, and I want to basically change the data in these two columns. So remember what this looks like. And now if I run the update command, and now if I do a select, I see that the date's now changed. 97522, 11/7/30, payment date, update, execute, select. 11/7. Okay, what's going on? Okay, so what's really great about doing this and reading the book and learning is we all get to learn something. It wasn't until, if you look in the very bottom of page 207, it tells you to do the following. I'm going to do this update statement the way the book suggested, and I'm going to execute it. And notice here, we're getting an error. You are using safe update mode. Have you tried to update to the table without a where clause? So on the bottom of 207, we have to do the following things. We have to go Edit, Preferences, and it says to go to SQL Editor. it lied, depending on the version. It was under SQL queries. There is safe updates forbid where no key. So I'm going to actually uncheck that and click OK. And what we have to do is we actually have to restart. We have to restart the editor, SQL editor. So there, and let's go back into MySQL Workbench. And let's use the AP database just to be sure we're there. And let's check Edit, Preferences, SQL Queries. This is now unchecked. So now we can select, and we can see that this record is here. We can select just the columns that we're going to change, and here we have 2011 730, $1,700. Now let's issue the update command. Hey, yay, it liked it. Now let's look at the data, and we see that the data did in fact change. Now what's interesting is, let's see, let's also go on. There's another example where it's saying that what we want to do is change the terms. So let's just get rid of all of this. It wants to update the terms where for every vendor, we're going to change the terms for a given vendor. So let's select star, or matter of fact, let's go vendor ID, comma, terms ID from invoices where vendor ID equals 95. Get rid of the star there. Okay, so see, vendor ID, the terms are currently 2. We want to update that to terms 1 for just this vendor, and we'll execute that. It did execute it, and we'll run the select statement again, and now that they're all at 1. Now what was interesting is, as I was, and there's also another example, you can update the invoices table for the credit total and add a, here we can basically add $100. So let's select, I'm going to copy this. Select star from invoices. So we can see this one invoice, and we see that the credit total is $200 right now. And here we're going to take the credit total and add 100 to it, run it, and then execute this. Now the credit total is $300. So you can even do math in the updates as well. Now what's interesting is, as we were dealing with that one little EX database, if we go use EX and go back to that color sample, describe color sample, yes. Oh, I didn't issue my use EX command. Now issue describe color sample. There we go. I'm still in the AP database. Now select star from color sample. What I was expecting to happen is that we are going to do some updates here to this table, because we had done some inserts and added some records here. So give me a second, and I'm going to create a couple of statements that we can do and just update this a little. Okay, so we're using the EX database. We've described the color sample table, and we see the columns. We're going to look at all the data. We need to update this data here. And I noticed, first of all, well, even starting, I happen to notice number 2 didn't have a color number. We had a color called yellow, but it didn't have a color number. So we're going to update the color sample, setting the color number to 878, where the color ID equals 2. So I'm going to execute that, and then I'm going to take a look at the data, and now that's 878. Now, what I also might need to change here is, do I have any other color numbers that need to be changed? Here I got where it's 3. So I'm going to change 3, and then I'm going to make the color number orange 888. And then I'm going to select and look at that. And I'm going to go to number 5 now, color ID 5, where we don't have anything there. So I'm going to go 5, and then I'm going to do the color number, put a comma after this, and color name equal to, with quotes, let's go pink, and the color number for pink is going to be 321. So update color sample, set color number equal to 321, color name to pink, where color ID equals 5. And if we execute that, and if we take a look at the select statement, now we have pink there. So go ahead and execute a few other statements and get your color sample table all filled out where you have no nulls in those 9 records that you have there. But you've got the picture there, and you have the idea where you can say, I'm going to find a record and I need to make some changes to it. Okay, if you remember back a chapter or 2 ago, we talked about subqueries, and that's where you did a query first to get a result set, and then you can then query and select from that given set. Subqueries is also true when you're doing update, when you're updating records as well. We're now going to flip back to the UseAP database. We're using that. Page 208 and 209. Is an example of the same basic statement. And what's really good about any of these languages is once you understand the basic principle of the statement and the context of that, it's then a matter of the devil's in the details of working out what business problem you're trying to solve. So here we're doing, we're setting the terms ID to 1 for Pacific Val. So what I probably want to do first is this select statement here. Let's issue this select statement just to see what it is we're looking at. Vendor ID is 1. I want vendor ID, and let's actually, whoops, vendor ID select star. Select star from vendors. And we'll see where this is true. Somewhere around here I have terms. Terms is at 2. And so now if I update, so what's happening is that terms is going to be 2. What I really need to do is then come here, and we're actually updating the invoices table. So that was a bad select statement. Let me take this. Select terms ID and vendor ID. Is that going to like us okay? Get rid of this. Hang on a second. Okay, so again, the book kind of messed us up with statements. And so here's a select statement where I'm selecting from the invoices table the terms and the vendor ID with a sub-select from the vendors table to get the name Pacific Bell. It figured. Okay, so what you need to do is create this select statement right here. And what we're doing is we're pulling all of the terms and the vendor from the invoices file, but we're sub-selecting from the vendor with this join for the Pacific Bell vendor. So run this select statement first. You'll have to type it up. And the book is giving us the terms ID as 1. It might already be set to 1. If it's set to 2 or something else, you're pretty good. But now modify this update statement to set it to 3. And now this is the update statement from the book. And run that. And then do the select statement. And you'll see now that the terms ID is set to 3. You can also go ahead and issue the next select statement where we're getting it for the states as well, so that we can update the invoices for certain states. And basically what we're doing here is we're doing a subquery, and that subquery is allowing us to make the changes. And here, if we then say select star from invoices, after we issue that, and then do that, and now you can see the terms ID is set to 1 for everybody in those states. Very good. Okay, so for a short chapter, this has really taken a long time, and I apologize, but I think we've actually covered some really good stuff. We've definitely learning a lot more about CRUD and CRUD operations. Let's get this back over to here. So the last pages, 210 and 211, are basically delete. And what I want to do is, before we delete these various records, and this is where we're not dropping a table or truncating all, but based on a where clause, we're deleting a certain record that is true. So if we take this first delete clause and we go select star from general ledger accounts, and what you always want to do is you want to really run your select statement. Okay, so now here we have the select statement, and we say, okay, that's really the record I want. So now I can delete the record. Now I come back and I'll select the record. It doesn't exist. And then here I can take this delete statement here, and before you actually run a delete statement, what you really need to do is run a select statement. Run this select statement. Okay, this is the invoice. Okay, so the subquery and stuff. So now I can go ahead and delete it. I can select it, and it's true. Let's take this one here, turn this into a select statement. All delete statements, you should do a select before you run it. Star from invoice. Okay, so here we have several invoices that invoice ID is equal to 12. We're going to delete those now. I'm issuing this delete command. And now I come back up here to issue this select command. What happened here? We're invoice ID 4 rows returned. Select. Delete. Okay, 4 rows affected. They were deleted. Now I should be able to, and now they're gone. Okay, I know I must not have clicked correctly. And let's take this last one, copy it. Let's turn that delete statement to a select statement first. So So let's issue the select statement. There's our records. And then let's issue the delete statement. And now let's issue the select statement again. No records found. So there are times when you want to create a record, you want to read a record, you want to update a record, and you want to delete a record. And all of the stuff we've learned so far for the reading of the data and the select and the where clause, the unions and the joins and the subqueries, that all applies, as you've learned, to all of these operations. Well, we went through 12, 13 pages, 14 pages in just about an hour. So I'm sorry this one took a lot longer, but CRUD operations and understanding the differences and understanding how to issue these commands is key and vital. And really, really, really be careful on the delete statement. Make sure you issue your select statement and you know what you're doing. And maybe what you want to do is use that create and create a copy of the table before you start and test it out on a copy of a table before you actually do it to the main. Remember we had like create archive invoices, create old invoice, create invoices temp, and then do your delete statements, do your update statements to a temp table, and verify that they work before you actually issue it to the main data. Okay, we are now finished Module 3, Week 3, and get ready to dig into Chapter 8 and start Module 4. Great, have a great day.